Michael Kaskey-Blomain joins me now on the Sports Bash. Check his stuff out right now at 97.3ESPN.com. He's got a piece up on Okafor. He's got a piece up on Nerlens Noel that you guys should check out. And we'll talk about those and Joel Embiid as well, Michael, because there's a lot of conspiracy theorists out there on the way the Sixers are handling Joel and the fear whenever, a guy who's missed 2 years is sitting out games. Is there more to this, or is this just them being extra cautious? What is your take on the Joel Embiid saga?
From everything that I've been able to gather, I think it's just an example of the team being extra cautious with an injury to who's, a player that's obviously developed into, the centerpiece of the team moving forward. I think it happens to work out in a timely manner as far to reference kind of the conspiracy theories you were talking about, a couple of them you were talking about with, the trade deadline coming up. It works a little bit, in the team's favor as far as they kind of get an opportunity to, play some of the other guys a little bit more, whether it be Nerlens Noel or Jahlil Okafor, in the absence of Embiid. But, as of right now, I wouldn't be overly concerned as far as being, a Sixers fan. I don't think, as you mentioned, he's doubtful to play in Miami tomorrow night. I don't think he'll play in Detroit the following night either. So then we'd be looking at maybe Wednesday at home against they have a rematch against the Spurs coming up on Wednesday. That's if it stretches past that, if we're looking at that game and it's still if he's still out of the lineup and his status is up in the air, I think at that point it's fair to question what's going on really. But for now I think it's really just kind of doing what they've done over the past few seasons and given extra ample opportunity for a guy to recover from an injury. And, it doesn't hurt that these other guys are getting more minutes in the meantime.
Yeah, it's probably a good thing in that aspect. But what is your take then? There's a lot of people who feel, all right, well, why did he play Friday night against Houston? The easy thing is to say, well, it was nationally televised. They've been down this road before. He seemed like he maybe played one of his best games of the season, right? I mean, 32 points, he has a huge night, and then all of a sudden he hasn't played again since.
Yeah, that's the only somewhat strange part, considering there was that one game, like you said, in Houston that he did play. Joel himself said that he wanted to play that night. He asked the trainer, just said he was good to go. And it's possible that afterwards he did play obviously very well that night, almost led the team to a victory despite James Harden's, crazy performance. There's a chance that, afterwards he was still just feeling some lingering effects, let the training staff know. And at that point they decided to not shut him down, obviously, but just sit him down for, the next few games to let him fully heal up. But, I don't think it's something to be overly concerned about, at least at this point in time.
All right. It looks like he will not. In fact, the Sixers do not anticipate him playing Saturday or Monday. He's missed 3 straight, 6 of 7 since hurting that knee back on the 20th. Brett Brown said, I think it's going to be a challenge for him to play, which kind of indicates he will most likely not play. All right. So that means Joel Embiid out. It means Jahlil Okafor has gotten an opportunity. How do you think he is grabbing this opportunity?
I think it's definitely extremely difficult for him in this situation to go from, not playing for weeks at a time to being thrust not only into the lineup but into a starting role. So with that in mind, I think it's hard for a player to, kind of really maybe assert himself as much as he would have if he was in the flow. With that being said, though, there's still the same, it's still the same issues kind of with his game and the fit with the team that's been the case in the past. He doesn't have that same, rim protecting kind of up and down athletic ability that pretty much the other 3 bigs have in Embiid, Noel, and even Holmes, and their ability to kind of, get up and down the floor, protect the rim and not really need to take the ball for an extended period of time on the offensive end. His, it's just looking increasingly like his skill set is just not really, fitting with the style of play that I think Brett Brown is really trying to instill in this team. Brett's kind of talked about repeatedly how he wants it to be a system-based approach rather than a player, kind of like, the Spurs last night. He was talking about, so whoever he has, he just plugs them into this system that he has and everyone knows their role. And at this point, it just kind of looks and feels like Okafor kind of just falls outside of the box that Brett kind of has in mind for the team.
That in mind now, you wrote yesterday that it would mutually benefit both these guys. I think we all are coming to grips with that. There was a report that the Bulls would be interested. I don't know that Okafor, and I'm not suggesting that first off, let me go back a minute here before I get into that. This guy had surgery in March of 2016 to have a meniscus injury. Number one, why was he still having knee issues in training camp if he had that's a 6-week injury? I mean, he shouldn't have not had that long of a layoff. That's one. And two, why has his knee lingered? Because it seems like he just doesn't have the same explosion. This guy caught the ball in the block last year and scored. I mean, he scored last year, 17 points a game. He was a handful. Something doesn't add up to me with that knee injury.
You're right on that, and I think obviously that's something you'd have to ask the doctors. But he definitely lacks based off the eye test at least, an explosion that he came into the league with last year. And like you said too, the lingering effects of that going all the way into training camp to the point that he was on a minute restriction to start this year, and is still has sat out some games with what's been credited as a
soreness,
knee.
right?
It's definitely interesting and kind of confusing, like you said, considering it's something that should have been, healed up and pretty much done with, before training camp really got underway. But it's obviously impacting his game to some extent. You could see there was a play on a fast break the other night where I forget who the guard was, but he tossed it up above the rim, and and any other of the big guys who were there would have caught it, and on an alley-oop situation, Jahlil had to go up, get it, come down, and go back up with it. And it was just kind of a very obvious example during the middle of a game of the lack of kind of explosion that he doesn't have compared to those other guys. And I think at this point it's a combination of whatever is going on with that knee, which I don't know, but I think you bring up good points. That, and I think he definitely has lost a little bit of the confidence that he came into the league with. I know that his first game last season as a rookie, he came in and dropped 26 points, and he had that that explosion and that you kind of referenced. And I think at that point he's coming in as the third pick in the draft, fresh in the league. Now he's kind of dealing with this situation where a good percentage of the fan base doesn't want him around. He doesn't necessarily fit, and he's playing wise inferior to Embiid and getting beat out by Noel. So I think his confidence has to be shaken on the level from especially for a guy that's used to being the top player on a team, whether rec league all the way up to winning a national championship in his only year in college. So I think the combination of those two things is definitely having a serious impact on Okafor's on-court effort right now.
Yeah, and the feeling of is there this feeling from him potentially that number one, it feels like his offensive repertoire has not expanded, and that people know his 2 or 3 moves or what he's going to do. And here's a guy, as you kind of chronicled, Michael. He's probably the AAU star, the high school star, the college star. He comes into the league as a rookie and kind of goes, and now the game has changed. Like that style of player, while he was the best all the way through, the NBA game has slowly been changing, and now when he finally gets to this point, the style of play that he has dominated with is no longer a style of play that is usable in the NBA anymore.
He would have been good in the 90s, man. I'll tell you that much.
Oh, like I said, Michael, I asked a question earlier in the show. Would Karl Malone fit in today's game?
I mean, fit, yes. Be probably as good and dominant as he was. No, I don't think so.
Right, like that style of player, that's not the game anymore. Like the traditional 4 is gone, and so this isn't to say that Okafor stinks. It's just that it's almost like his game just is square peg round hole for the whole league. So let's go back to the moment where I started that question. Chicago. Is that a team where his skill set fits? Like, are they accepting of a guy who's going to score 18 points but play no defense?
That's the question. And, with Chicago, it's hard to tell. They seem to be in desperation land right now, considering that they're, in a win now mode, and I don't know if an addition like Okafor really helps them win now. So their interest in him seems like a little peculiar outside of the fact that he's a Chicago kid and obviously he has hometown ties. But like you said, I think there's probably a few teams that could certainly use that skill set, but it's such a specialized skill set in today's game that it's not where a player like, for instance, like a guy like Nerlens, if they're both on the trade block, Nerlens seems like a guy that you could plug into a whole bunch of systems across the league and just tell him, protect the paint, run the floor, finish at the rim, and that fits in perfectly with the style of play. And he could do it all over. With Okafor, like you said, it's a different style of play that was prevalent in the 90s. And at this point, no team is really running their offense like that through a big guy, and it just it doesn't work as well. And if he's if he's unable to, like you said, it seems like as though his offense hasn't necessarily developed much since he came in the league. He's still not really comfortable with the mid range. He's still not an up and down type player, and that definitely limits his impact on the court, and B what suitors he'll have on the market.
Yeah, one spot, he seems like Oklahoma City, where they had Canner, who basically plays less defense than he does. But they have Adams, so they split the minutes nicely between those two guys. The problem seems to be in Philly, the minutes aren't there to really split. And, you could have two different styles of players, an offensive-minded guy and a defensive-minded guy. The problem is, the Sixers don't have the minutes for him. So there are certain teams where you have Steven Adams. He could play, 28 minutes, and then Okafor would get the other 28 minutes. He needs to be on a team that has that defensive-minded guy and needs the low post offensive presence. And I don't know how many of those fits are. Do you think Chicago has the pieces to send back to Philadelphia? I look at that roster, and I don't know that there's a match there. You would probably need a third team.
Well, that was when I saw that report surface late last night. That was immediately the first thought that popped into my head. Like, there's nothing really that I think that the Bulls would have to offer that's very enticing to the Sixers or the Sixers fan base. The Bulls don't have a whole lot of young, promising players, and they have obviously a lot of veterans locked into pretty hefty contracts. Obviously the only really attractive name for the Sixers on that roster would be Jimmy Butler, and obviously an Okafor for Butler trade straight up wouldn't happen. So in that scenario, like you said, it would have to extrapolate to include a third team and a whole bunch of other parts. I mean, otherwise the Bulls have Denzel Valentine was the name that's tossed out. Mirotic. They have a few guys, Doug McDermott, but none of those guys really, it seems like, would move the needle in the Sixers rebuild or necessarily even have a role or a spot. A strange fit as far as what the team would get back. I think that'll be a sticking point too, based off what Brian Colangelo has said. He's not going to just make a move for the sake of making a move if he doesn't feel that the value coming back is worthwhile. He might not pull the trigger. So that's as far as the Bulls at least are concerned, that's definitely something to kind of wonder about as far as what they would even really have to offer the Sixers in return for Jahlil Okafor.
Michael Kaskey-Blomain is with us here. Check him out at 973ESPN.com. Let's look at the flow chart here for Nerlens Noel. Should the Sixers trade Nerlens Noel? Give us the variables in your mind.
To me, it's honestly a pretty black and white decision, and I think it's turned out to be so, even more so over the course of this season. He's obviously, he fits in perfectly with the style of play of the team. The teams, they've excelled, played really well with him as the backup to Embiid. It allows them to, maintain that style of play that I was referencing that Brett Brown's really trying to instill when, Embiid goes to the bench, or if he has to miss a game for, planned rest or whatever it is. Having Noel as a guy that can just plug in, it's worked well. And he seems like a guy that certainly would be worth keeping around. So basically, the way I look at it, at least, the decision comes down to trade him or not before the upcoming trade deadline, which is about 3 weeks from now. They have that, obviously, a pretty big decision to make with a few guys there. But with Noel specifically, it really just comes down to the factor of, first of all, if the front office is willing and ready to pay and match whatever offers Noel will see this summer. Obviously, he'll be a restricted free agent, meaning that other teams can sign him to offer sheets that the Sixers can then match. So if the front office is going into the offseason with the intention of we want to keep this guy around, will match offers for him, which, will probably be pretty hefty, Mike, considering, the bump in the salary cap recently in the NBA combined with, Noel's age and skill set, which, we kind of were saying how that fits really well with the pace and style of the league today. I think he'll certainly have his fair share of teams, interested in signing him. So if the front office is, down with the concept of paying him the money, then that's factor A. If they're down with that, then they have to talk to him specifically and see if he'd be okay. Because, obviously as long as Joel Embiid is here and healthy and in the picture, he is the Philadelphia 76ers starting center. So, they'd have to ask Nerlens personally if that's the case, assuming, let's say Jahlil Okafor is out of the picture, if Noel would be okay with taking the role that he's basically had during January, during this recent string of success where he's been that, the backup center or the fill-in starting center, still getting, 28 to 32 minutes a game, tons of opportunity. He'll be getting the money, but he'll be the backup center. I think that's something that the Sixers need to hear that he'd be cool with directly from him, especially given, kind of how he handled the situation at the beginning of this year where he was, not quite content with what was going on. I think if they hear those two, if they hear that from him and they're willing to pay the money, then you don't trade him, you hold on to him and you re-sign him this summer. If there's doubts on either of those aspects, if either that Noel, does not want to be, a backup moving forward and he shows an interest in moving elsewhere, or if the team just isn't interested in investing the money in basically a backup center, then, at that point you have to make a move before the deadline to recoup what you can.
Yeah, Michael Kaskey-Blomain is with us, 97.3 ESPN.com, covers the Sixers. Colangelo is kind of in a tough spot because yesterday Chris Mannix was on and said that he's talked to guys around the league, executive, who said the problem is the Sixers value Noel and Okafor as top 6 picks because obviously that's where they were drafted, and teams around the league do not value them in that manner. So that sounds like it's going to be tough to move if Colangelo has that mindset.
Yeah.
In other words, is he going to have to maybe in his mind lose a deal, be on the losing end of the trade?
I think so. If you're looking at it, how a lot of fans look at a deal strictly based off, recency of where a player was drafted. So whatever they're going to get back for, let's say it's Jahlil Okafor at this trade deadline, it's not going to be a top 3 pick from the past 2 years. So basically in that regard, when you're looking at it, yes, the Sixers, I think they'll have to quote unquote lose a trade. In the long scheme of things, it won't. It'll, clearing up the space and being able to even out the roster will be a victory. But, I think that the league knows that the Sixers need to make this move. It's been known for a while. We were talking about this exact same thing back in June when I was in Brooklyn for the draft. It's not a new issue. It's been there. So I think that, that obviously hurts the team's leverage a bit, as does the fact that, the logjam is kind of not, it hasn't really given each player, specifically Jahlil, really an opportunity to show his skills as much heading up to the deadline. So I think those two factors combined with, the situation, expectations might have to be lowered. I think a deal, for the sake of the franchise to move forward, I think a deal needs to be done. And like you said, it might end up having to be where on paper it looks like the Sixers take a bit of a loss.
What if, like the Chicago deal? Number one, do you feel like Chicago legitimately is interested in Okafor?
Yeah, I feel like there would be some interest there. I mean, I believe that they certainly reached out to the Sixers. They're a team in flux right now without a lot of, young players to build around. Rondo, I don't see him lasting out there long. Wade obviously doesn't have much time left in the league, and that leaves you with, Jimmy Butler, who's been, reportedly feuding on and off with the front office and teammates. So it's basically, it seems like a team that doesn't really have a lot of direction, and if they sense that, they could get a guy that, like we said, is a year removed from being a top 3 pick and is still 21 and, is a big guy and obviously has those Chicago ties, I think it would be intriguing. What they have to give up and what they'd be willing to give up are obviously the main drawing points. And I think there'd probably be a couple other teams, obviously, too, throughout the league that would be interested.
Should be a very interesting next 3 weeks for the 76ers. And on top of that, are there any other guys in your mind? Noel Okafor stand out, but do you think there are any other guys that the Sixers should try to move? That you think at this point their value is maxed out and that they would be wise to try to get them out by the 23rd?
I don't know if they'd be wise to try it, but I really would not be surprised if they get a lot of people coming asking about Ersan Ilyasova. I think he's played really, really well throughout the season since he joined the Sixers, and I think he's like we were saying about Noel, as a stretch forward that plays, is a hard-nosed guy that can rebound and shoot and, play a little bit of defense. I think he would certainly have a market for some teams, in contention for the playoffs and looking to make a, kind of a splash at the deadline to give themselves a boost. I really think that Ersan would be a guy that some teams would be interested in. He's a free agent after this season, which obviously limits, probably how much teams would be willing to give up for him. But I think he'll be a guy on the market. I'm curious myself I'd wonder if a guy like Richaun Holmes, what he'd draw on the market. He's kind of been really limited in how much he's been able to play this year. But I think he has some upside and potential. And then maybe Sergio Rodriguez. Same situation on a little bit lower of a scale than Ersan. As far as Sergio doesn't really seem like he has any sort of a long-term future in Philly. He's here on a one-year deal and kind of, has already lost the starting spot to TJ. They just signed, Chase and Randall. So Sergio was a guy, if a team, for instance, just for example, the LeBron and the Cavs say they need a playmaker, a bench guard. If a team needed a player like that, Sergio might fit the bill. So I think that there'll definitely be a bunch of some teams interested in some of the Sixers players. Obviously, Noel and Okafor will be the main attractions. But like you said, the next couple weeks will be really interesting. And it'll be interesting to see how Brian Colangelo handles the first, major trade deadline here with the Sixers.
There's no doubt. All eyes are on him, and I think the Okafor one, his back is up against the wall. He's in kind of a minimal win situation. Is that fair? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think, like you said, the return's probably not going to be too great. But then if he sits on it and doesn't make a move, I think a big portion of the fan base and maybe some of the locker room itself wouldn't be too happy with the situation. So he's kind of, like you said, it's definitely a difficult situation that he might not come out of looking great. But in the long run, if he handles it well, it'll fold into the continuing development of the team. All right, Michael Kaskey-Blomain, the real Mike KB on Twitter. Check out his Sixers stuff right now at 97.3 ESPN.com as Sixers take on the Heat tomorrow night, 7:30 here on 97.3. All right, buddy, take care.
Thanks, Mike. You too.